Hi there and welcome to Today in DeFi. So in this video, it's gonna be a DeFi educational video for DeFi's biggest lending protocol, which is Aave protocol. So we're gonna make this series, it's called DeFi 101. It's basically gonna teach you and educate you on how DeFi works and the value proposition of DeFi. So we're super early in the industry, and I think educational videos like this are very important. So people will get an idea of what will DeFi actually solve. Alright, let's go into the video. So first of all, before going into DeFi, we need to actually be aware of how traditional banks work, because the protocol that we're talking about today it's called Aave protocols, and Aave protocol is a DeFi lending and borrowing protocol. So it works more like a bank, but it's decentralized, so it's self-custody, no one controls your fund, and it's more of a P2P method, but it's on-chain, so it uses smart contract technologies and so on. We're gonna go into that one deeper later, but yeah, so we're gonna have to be aware of how traditional banks work. So first of all, banks need a source of funds. So there's people like, for example, when we put money in the bank, it's called deposits, right? So the arrows right here represent money flows into the bank and into lenders, into people, and how banks actually earn money. So first of all, deposits. So people lend money to the bank, and the bank's job, what's the bank's job? So the bank's job is to actually give out credit to people that will actually borrow money from the bank. Yeah, this is called credit, and the people borrowing is called the debtor, right? So they're like literally the borrowers. They borrow money from the bank and they have to provide collaterals, right? And according to the bank, this collateral could actually be less valuable than the credit. So the credit is bigger than the collateral. That might be the case. DeFi actually solves this problem by, we're gonna go into that one later. But yeah, when the credit's value is more than the collateral's value, this would be a problem since banks could fail. So these borrowers, they could fail to actually repay their loans, and that would be how the bank would not make money. That's how banks would lose money. All right, going on. So usually the flow would be like this, and lenders usually will pay interest to the bank, and the bank will pay interest to the depositors, right? Like us. This revenue stream is called net interest margin. For example, bank charges like 10% of interest when they earn money to the borrowers, and they will pay 5% interest to the depositors. So the spread between these interests called the net interest margin, and that's the revenue stream of the banks. So this is banks get profits from the net interest margin. The spread between the interest from the borrowers against the interest from the depositors. All right, so that's how bank works. And the main job of the bank is to allocate the money obtained from the depositors to the borrowers. All right, so that's the main job and the main function of the bank. And this is how the economic machine works. All right. And now let's get into how DeFi works, how DeFi lending and borrowing protocol works, like Aave protocol. This is just an example. There's a lot of lending and borrowing protocols, and just like its name, so lending protocol. So everyone must actually lend to borrow assets in Aave protocol. So we're gonna go into that a little bit more, but yeah, it's basically the same. So there's two sides. There are the lenders, the depositors. So the deposit assets, they deposit crypto, like you can deposit ETH, you can deposit BTC, for example. You can deposit stablecoins like USDC, USDT into the protocol, right? And borrowers can actually borrow these assets that is provided into the protocol, but they have to first provide collateral. And this is why DeFi is, so this is what DeFi is trying to solve, which they're trying to over collateralize the depth. So it will actually minimize the So it will actually minimize the failure of the borrowers to actually repay the loans. Yeah, and borrowers should also pay interest, and yeah, actually, and lenders will get interest from the protocol by supplying or depositing assets. So these deposit assets, right? So people deposit assets, but they don't actually have to borrow. So you can actually just put your USDC into Aave and just earn yield, just simply earn yield. You don't have to actually borrow money from them. So that's actually very interesting. You can actually get more interest on Aave protocol than you can get by depositing your assets into the bank. And I think that's the edge of DeFi. And yeah, you can explore more yields in different chains. And another interesting thing about DeFi is you can be your own bank. What's the meaning of this? It's open 24 hours, so you can do transactions anytime, anywhere you want, as long as you have your wallets and you have Wi-Fi, you have your internet going on. Make sure to have the right security. And yeah, you can actually operate, you can borrow, you can supply money anytime you want. And there are no intermediaries, right? There's no one controlling your funds. It's basically decentralized. It's self-custody. So you control your own funds, you control your own assets, and it's full transparent. So you can actually see the amount of money being lent into the protocol and the amount of money being borrowed from the protocol. So let's get into the protocol and let's just see how this works. All right, so we're here, and so you can actually, there's a lot of chains in Aave. So right now I'm gonna explain a little bit about the core, about Ethereum core chain and Aave. Like for example here, you can actually just deposit your Ethereum for a 4% APY right here. It's spiking recently, but yeah, it's a pretty good yield right now since funding rates are going up. If we go back to the market page, you can actually also see the borrow APY here. So you can borrow Ethereum for a 5% APY. Obviously, borrowing would be more expensive. Like borrowing would cost higher than supplying, of course. That's how Aave also gets their revenue, their profits. And yeah, you can actually put like your USDT here, your idle USDC or USDT if you're not using them, for 3.65, 3.71%. And if you check out other chains like Arbitrum on layer 2, which gives you a lower gas fee, yeah, you will get a lower APY by supplying Ethereum, but you can actually get almost 5% only lending USDC here. And yeah, 4% on USDT, which is pretty interesting. You can check out different strategies, different chains here, like for example, Base. All right, so on Base, you can get like 4.5% USDC, which is higher than Ethereum, but it's lower than Arbitrum. And you can actually gain 3.82% on your euro. Not other protocols offer that high of a yield on euro. If you're not using your euro, you can put it into Aave and earn a 3.82% without literally doing anything. You can actually borrow with only like a net 2.2% if you're borrowing on Base. So it's literally a very low interest rate when borrowing money. And above that, by providing euro as a collateral, you can also get interest on your collateral. And yeah, that literally means that you can get like zero net interest by borrowing, if you want to borrow euro on Aave right now. And that's what makes pretty interesting. I think you can't do that on traditional finance right now. You can't borrow money for free, otherwise that would be the economy failing miserably if you can actually get money for free. But you can on Aave. For example, if you were to supply like 100k USDT, so you're earning 3.71% on your supply. But if you want to borrow like 50k USDC, that will literally means you still get like a net 1% from your collateral. Since you're borrowing only half the amount of USDC, that means like you get free 50k to play around with in other protocols. And what makes Aave interesting as well, if you deposit into, for example, USDC right here, if you supply your USDC right here, you will get what is called an A token. Those A tokens are very composable, and they could be used in a lot of other DeFi protocols like Pendle, Spectra, in order for you to get yields on that as well. So the use cases and the utility is very huge and it's very wide, and that's what makes DeFi interesting. You can be very creative in actually earning yield on other protocols, and yeah, just be smart about that. And if you don't know how to farm properly and the best strategies on DeFi, we got you. We have our premiums page, or you can have our premium newsletter that provides daily guides on how to farm, and we will show the best farms we have right now that we discovered right now. And yeah, moving on. So in order to actually navigate the interest rate mechanism in DeFi, what actually affects the supply or borrow interest rate in Aave? You need to know the utilization ratio, which is calculated by the total borrowed by the total supplied for each market. So for example, in the USDT market, we are seeing people borrowing like 800 million amount, with the total supply being like 1 billion, which is like 1,000 million. So this makes the utilization ratio into 80%. So that's how it's calculated. We'll talk about this one later in the liquidation events. What happens when you borrow money but your collateral asset decreases in USD price. But for now, we're going to focus in the interest rate mechanism. So in this, I made like a bunch of scenarios right here. For example, when supply increase, the utilization, considering that the borrowing stays the same, the utilization rate actually decrease, right? As the calculation says itself. So when the supply increase and this stays the same, the utilization ratio actually goes down. And what happens is that the borrowing interest rate also goes down, and the supplier interest rate also goes down. So why is that? So this actually encourages borrowing, right? So you can now borrow money with cheaper fees. So you can get cheaper money in Aave or in DeFi. So the second scenario is when supply decrease. When supply decrease, utilization rate increase. So when this happens, the yields across the supplying and borrowing side both increase. So it's pretty straightforward. So when utilization rate decrease, both yields actually decrease. But when it increase, it both increases. So it goes both sides, and it's pretty straightforward. So you can actually only track of the utilization rate, and you can navigate the market's interest rates basically. So in the scenario here, when supply stays the same, all right, when supply is the same and borrowing goes up, the borrower interest rates increase, and also the supplying interest rate also increase, which actually encourages lenders to lend their money for a better interest rate. So you can earn more yields on your crypto, on your digital assets, right? So fourth scenario, maybe the last relevant one, is when supply stays the same and borrowing decrease, all right? And yeah, utilization rate decrease and everything decreases. So this encourages borrowing activity as well. Yeah, so now you can actually borrow more money with cheaper fees, basically. So yeah, that's how interest rates works in Aave. And next we're gonna talk about liquidation events. So when you borrow money, the most important factor that you must pay attention to, which is the health factor. Now you want this health factor to actually equal more than, because when it gets to less than 1, then the liquidation event occurred. So for this example, my collateral of 1 Ethereum that is worth 3,500 at that time. At that time, it was priced 3,500 US dollars, and I borrowed 2,500 worth of USDT. Okay, so the health factor calculated by the collateral value, which is my ETH, times the liquidation threshold. You can actually navigate this one through here. When you are you want to borrow USDT. So the liquidation threshold right here is 78%. That's where I get my calculation. Yeah, so for 78%, and you will get the health factor of 1098. Yeah, you can run it up to 1.1, but actually in practice this is like a very risky health factor, because yeah, you can get easily liquidated if the price goes down. And if ETH goes down to 3,000, then you will get liquidated if you still have the same amount of. So since we are using this formula, it will actually amount to less than 1, and then liquidation will. What happens when liquidation events actually occurred? So up to 50% of your USDT is repaid by liquidators, and a liquidation penalty of 4.5% for USDT is applied to the seized collateral right here. So the seized collateral for ETH, and yeah, each assets vary for this penalty. And yeah, liquidations are actually just like the protocol itself. It's permissionless, so it incentivizes rapid executions by bots and searchers. So this could happen in an instant when price drops and health factors drop below 1. So that's how liquidation events in Aave. So when talking about Aave, just this year, there's a very interesting new safety module that just launched. It's called the Umbrella safety module. So you can go here to the staking and you can search here, the Umbrella, right here. Yeah, so it's basically, you can read here, Umbrella is the upgraded version of the safety module. So Umbrella replaces the legacy safety module. So it's basically a mechanism introduced to prevent bad debt. So Umbrella allows users to stake two kinds of assets. If you can see here, so like for example, so A tokens, right here, A tokens such as like a USDC, a USDT, and a wrap ETH, and yeah, and Go, which is Aave's native stablecoin, which I will talk about more later. Yeah, you by staking these protocols assets, so users actively contribute to the risk management that they're having, and while earning rewards. And obviously the APY here are interesting, since you can actually use these yield-bearing tokens, which is to actually lend it to other farming protocols like Pendle, Spectra, and yeah, other more protocols that can actually earn more yield. So you can stack up more yields on that. So this Umbrella enhances the resilience of the Aave protocol by replacing the old safety model with an automated staking system. If a deficit occurs in a given asset, if a deficit occurs in USDC or in USDT, so it's a specific market. So Umbrella enables the corresponding staked assets to be burned and offset the bad debt. So it removes the needs for governance decisions, which will actually take a while, or manual intervention by the founders or the devs. So this creates, the idea is to create a more efficient, responsive, and predictable safety mechanism for the protocols and its users. All right, so that's the main idea of Umbrella. And another interesting thing is the Go token. So it's a CDP stablecoin. It's collateralized. It's a collateralized debt protocol, and yeah, it's over collateralized. It's stable. It's a stablecoin pegged basically to the USD. So basically, if you want to mint, you must some assets in supplying collateral in Aave, in the Ethereum market specifically, and yeah, you can borrow Go right now with 5% APY, and yeah, you can actually deposit it into the savings Go for 7.7% APY as well. Yeah, here it is, the utilization ratio. It has a borrow cap of 220 mil, and right now the total borrowed is 188 million. So it has a maximum cap of borrowing. So yeah, that's how it works. And I think there are a lot of farming opportunities using Go in different protocols. So yeah, it's very worth checking out. So you can stack up more yields by depositing your Go here and stack yields there. You need to be creative in DeFi, and I think that's what differs great DeFi trader from beginner DeFi trader in general.